Amid the chaos of a crowded supermarket, Henry, an old man with a kind heart, paused when he noticed a young mother, Emily, desperately trying to soothe her two hungry, crying toddlers. The children were sobbing uncontrollably, tears streaming down their tired little faces. Without a moment's hesitation, Henry decided to step forward and help, thinking it was just a small act of kindness. But he had no idea this would lead to an event that would change his life forever. Henry usually went grocery shopping early in the morning to avoid crowds, but that day something different caught his attention. Near the fruit section, he saw Emily struggling to keep her balance with a basket full of groceries while her two children clung to her, pulling at her clothes, demanding her attention. Henry watched from a distance, his heart aching with compassion. Perhaps it was the exhaustion so clearly etched on Emily's face or the sound of the children's sobs that touched a deep memory of his late wife, Anna, and the years filled with vitality they had shared. Driven by compassion, Henry stepped forward. "Excuse me, do you need any help?" he asked, his voice gentle and sincere. Emily looked up, clearly surprised, but tried to smile. "We're fine, just a bit tired," she replied, brushing back her hair and trying to stay calm as her two children continued tugging at her. Henry glanced at her basket, seeing the carefully selected items. He noticed the anxiety in Emily's movements, and his heart softened even more. "Sometimes the day arrives before we're ready for it," Henry said, attempting to lighten the mood. Emily let out a faint laugh, but it was a strained chuckle, the kind of laugh that belongs to someone carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders. When Emily reached the checkout, Henry followed at a respectful distance, observing as she unloaded her items one by one. The children, now somewhat calmer, clung to their mother, staring at the cashier. The final amount flashed on the screen, and Henry saw Emily fumble with her wallet, realizing she didn't have enough money. "I'll have to put some things back," she murmured, trying to decide what to leave behind. Before Emily could do so, Henry stepped forward and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Please, let me take care of this," he said, his voice firm yet compassionate. Emily was stunned, about to refuse. "No, sir, I can't accept this." But Henry smiled warmly. "Of course you can. Sometimes we all need a little help," he said, taking out his wallet and paying the cashier. "Consider it a gift." Emily looked up, her face flushing with embarrassment. "I don't know what to say." "Thank you," she stammered, glancing quickly at her two children, who were now looking at Henry with curious and relieved eyes. Henry smiled, waving at the kids. "No need to thank me," he said kindly. "Small gestures can make a big difference." Emily nodded, clearly moved, while Henry paid for his own groceries. He waved goodbye with a light-hearted gesture and left the supermarket, but he couldn't shake the image of the mother and her two children from his mind. On the way home, he kept thinking about Emily and her situation. Back at his quiet house, Henry felt the silence pressing even deeper. Since his wife Anna had passed away, the house had never felt less empty. But today, the memory of Emily and her children seemed to stir something within him, a sense of connection he hadn't felt in a long time. 5 days later, Henry was jolted awake by the sound of his phone ringing. A call was rare, and he muttered to himself, thinking it might be a wrong number. He got up from his armchair, still half asleep, and answered, "Hello," his voice thick with grogginess. On the other end, Emily's voice came through, gentle yet urgent. "Mr. Henry." "It's me, Emily," she said, her voice trembling, as if she felt awkward calling him. Henry immediately remembered the young mother from the supermarket. His heart tightened. "Of course I remember you," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "How are you? Are the kids okay?" Emily was silent for a moment, then let out a heavy sigh. "I don't even know where to start," she said. "I just wanted to thank you again. But things have only gotten worse. We were evicted because I couldn't pay the rent, and now we're living in our car." Her voice cracked, as if she were fighting back tears. Henry felt a sharp pang in his chest. He could vividly imagine the helplessness Emily must be feeling. Losing Anna had left a void in his life that had never been filled, but the thought of a mother and her 2 children sleeping in a car made him feel restless. He took a deep breath and spoke, his voice full of determination. "You did the right thing by calling me, and if there's anything I can do to help, I will." Emily hesitated. "You've already done too much. I don't want to be a burden." Henry stood up, pacing the room, trying to come up with a solution. Then an idea struck him. "Listen," he said, "I have a spare room in my house. If you and the kids need a place to stay, it's yours. It's not much, but it's certainly better than a car." Emily was silent for a long moment, and Henry could imagine her weighing his offer. "I don't know what to say. I can't accept that." Her voice cracked with emotion. "I don't want to be a burden." Henry chuckled softly. "You won't be a burden, Emily. Trust me, I've been alone for too long. Maybe we both need this." Emily couldn't hold back her tears. Still hesitant, she knew that Henry genuinely wanted to help. She took a deep breath and whispered, "Thank you. Truly, thank you." In a moment of prolonged silence, Emily slowly nodded, her reluctance still evident. "All right, I'll accept. But only until I can get back on my feet," she said, her voice filled with worry. "I promise we won't stay long." Henry offered a gentle smile, understanding her struggle with pride. "Stay as long as you need," he said warmly. "Come over whenever you're ready." Emily stammered her gratitude, her eyes welling with tears, but she tried to stay composed. "We'll come this afternoon," she said. Henry hung up, standing still for a moment, his eyes gazing out at the garden he and his late wife, Anna, had once lovingly tended. The sunlight illuminated the flowers, bringing back memories of happier mornings. The large, empty house would soon be filled with new sounds, the laughter of children or even their cries. Somehow, he knew he had made the right choice. That afternoon, Emily arrived with her 2 children, Matteo and Luca. They carried only a few bags, the remnants of what was left after being evicted. Matteo, the older child, clung tightly to his mother's hand, while Luca, the younger one, looked around with wide, curious eyes. "Come in," Henry said, offering a warm smile as he opened the door wide. Emily stepped in, still hesitant, but the relief was clear in her eyes as she took in the welcoming sight of the house. The room Henry had prepared had a large bed for Emily and an extra mattress on the floor for the 2 children. He had even placed a vase of fresh flowers on the bedside table, trying to make it feel as welcoming as possible. "It's so much better than the car," Emily whispered, clearly moved. "And so much safer," Henry added. "Now you have a place to really rest." The children giggled, running to the bed, and for the first time since they arrived, the sound of laughter filled the once quiet space. Emily smiled at her kids, a genuine but weary smile, and Henry realized how precious that small moment was for her. "If you need anything, just let me know," he said, stepping out of the room. "Henry," Emily called out before he could leave, "I truly don't know how to thank you enough. This is so much more than I could have ever asked for." Henry gave her a bittersweet smile. "You don't have to thank me, Emily. I'm just glad to help." Yet, there was still a hint of sadness in his eyes, a distant memory of Anna. Emily didn't comment, but she sensed the pain in him, for she carried her own sorrow too. That evening, after the children had fallen asleep, Emily stepped out onto the porch, where Henry was sitting, gazing up at the starry sky. She hesitated before walking over, softly asking, "Are you all right?" Henry didn't take his eyes off the sky. "Yes, it's just nice to have company," he said. Emily sat down on the chair beside him, and the 2 of them shared a comfortable silence. The garden, still as beautiful as when Anna had been alive, glowed under the moonlight. "It's beautiful," Emily whispered. "Did you take care of all this yourself?" "Yes, ever since Anna passed away," Henry said, not bitterly, but with a quiet sorrow. "She loved this garden. We spent hours here. Now I care for it, for both of us." Emily looked at him, feeling the depth of his loneliness. She knew how hard it was to lose someone you loved. "It must be so difficult," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." Henry gently shook his head. "That's life. Takes so much from us. but it also gives us other things. Emily was silent, her eyes filled with emotion. I need to tell you the real reason we ended up in this situation, she said, her voice trembling. It's not just because we were evicted. I'm running from my ex-husband, Marco. He's a dangerous man. When I tried to leave that relationship, he made my life hell. Henry froze, absorbing her story. You don't have to be afraid, he said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You and the kids will be safe here. I'll protect you. Marco won't find you. Emily looked at him, surprised by his determination and gentleness. It had been a long time since she had felt truly protected. In the days that followed, Henry's home filled with the laughter of children, and the garden he and Anna once tended began to flourish again under Emily's care. Yet both of them knew that Marco's shadow hadn't completely vanished. Henry understood that to protect Emily and her children, he would have to be ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Emily looked at Henry, her face anxious. You don't have to get so involved in this, she said, her voice trembling slightly. If Marco finds us here, he'll cause trouble for you too. Henry placed a calming hand on her shoulder. I'm already involved, Emily, he said, his gaze firm. And I won't let him hurt you or the kids. Emily fell silent, absorbing his words. There was something in Henry's voice that made her feel safe, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. Despite the fear of Marco still lingering, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance to escape his shadow. Life at Henry's house gradually settled into a new rhythm. Emily and her two boys, Mason and Leo, were adjusting, and a sense of security grew stronger with each passing day. But Marco's threat never fully left Emily's mind. As for Henry, he remained steadfast in his determination to protect this newfound family, knowing that the battle was far from over. One night, after the children had gone to bed, Henry was in the kitchen making tea when he heard a faint knock at the door. He glanced out the window but saw no one. The knock came again, this time louder. Henry's heart raced as he made his way to the small hallway, opening the door to find the last person he ever expected, Marco. The tall man stood there with a menacing look, his posture radiating dominance. A chill ran down Henry's spine. Can I help you? Henry asked, striving to keep his voice steady, though he knew exactly who was standing before him. I believe you can, Marco replied, a mocking smile on his face. I'm looking for my wife, Emily, and my children. I know they're here. Henry felt the weight of those words. Emily had been right. Marco had found them. I think you're mistaken, Henry replied, his gaze unwavering. There's no one here who's running from anyone. Marco stepped closer, his eyes cold and threatening. Don't play games with me, old man. I know she's here, and if you think you can stop me from taking my family back, you're sorely mistaken. Marco's voice was ice-cold and cutting, devoid of any emotion. Henry knew he couldn't let Marco intimidate them. Taking a deep breath, he straightened his back. Emily isn't going anywhere with you, Marco. You've hurt her enough. She and the children are safe here, and I won't let you destroy that. Marco sneered, but it was a smile devoid of warmth. I thought you'd say that, he muttered, pulling an envelope out of his jacket pocket and handing it to Henry. Consider this my official notice. I have more resources than you think. This won't end well for you. Henry held the envelope, feeling the threat in every word Marco spoke. He opened it with trembling hands and saw a court summons. Marco had filed for full custody of the children, claiming Emily was unfit to care for them. We'll settle this in court, Henry said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Emily has her rights, and I'm sure a judge will see through you.
Marco Chakel.
You're brave, old man, but you'll learn the hard way that men like me always get what we want. He turned and walked away, leaving Henry standing in the doorway, the feeling of helplessness weighing heavily on him. He knew they had to act quickly. We need to bring everything to light, Emily said, her eyes filled with worry but also a newfound determination. It could ruin his reputation, but if we get our hands on those documents, we might finally turn the tide. Henry was silent for a few minutes, considering the risks and implications of invading Marco's privacy. Accessing personal records or recordings would be extremely dangerous. But Henry knew that without something concrete, it would be nearly impossible to win this fight. "How can we do this?" Henry asked, his voice thoughtful. Emily took a deep breath. "I know where he keeps those things. When we were together, he had a secret office in his house where he stored everything he considered important. I don't have a key, but he trusts an assistant named Enzo. If we can get Enzo to help, we might be able to get that evidence." Henry nodded, fully aware of the dangers involved. He knew this wouldn't be easy. Marco had a network of people willing to protect him at all costs. But as he looked at Emily, he also realized they had no other choice. "It's now or never," Henry declared. "I'll find a way to talk to Enzo. We need that evidence, and we need it fast." Emily was surprised by Henry's determination. Though he was an older man, his courage and resolve far exceeded his years. She smiled, a small but hopeful smile. "Thank you, Henry," she said. Her voice filled with emotion as she squeezed his hand for strength. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "Don't worry," Henry replied, gripping her hand firmly. "We'll get through this together." In the days that followed, Henry began to formulate a plan to approach Enzo. He discovered that Marco's assistant frequented a cafe in the city, realizing this would be his best chance. With the help of a lawyer, Henry worked out a strategy to persuade Enzo, using Marco's influence as leverage to present a compelling case. The following afternoon, Henry went to the cafe, tension building in his chest. He spotted Enzo sitting at a corner table, engrossed in his phone. Henry took a deep breath and approached. "Excuse me, are you Enzo?" Henry asked. Enzo looked up, startled by the unexpected approach. "Who's asking?" he replied, his voice wary. "My name is Henry," he introduced himself. "I'm not sure if you know me, but I'm a friend of Emily's. We need to talk." Enzo's eyes widened at the mention of Emily, and he quickly glanced around, clearly anxious. "What do you want?" Enzo asked, his voice low and guarded. Henry sat down, leaning in closer. "We know Marco has evidence, recordings, videos, documents, of the threats and abuse against Emily. We need those to protect her and the kids. We know you have access to them." Enzo's face showed turmoil, his eyes conflicted. "I can't do that," he whispered, avoiding Henry's gaze. "If Marco finds out, I'm finished." Henry kept his voice calm but firm. "If you keep helping him, you're enabling the abuse of Emily and her kids. You have a chance to do the right thing. And besides, if you don't act, Marco won't hesitate to cut you loose when he no longer needs you." Enzo bit his lip, visibly struggling with his inner conflict. "I'll think about it," he finally said, though his voice was fraught with uncertainty. Henry nodded, knowing that this was probably the best answer he could get at the moment. "We don't have much time, Enzo. Think carefully," Henry urged. Leaving the cafe, Henry felt a mix of anxiety and hope. The fate of Emily and her children now hung on Enzo's decision. In the days that followed, Henry waited anxiously for news from Enzo, the tension building with each passing hour. Emily felt the pressure too, though she tried to stay composed for her children's sake. Still, the fear of Marco never left her. One evening, as Henry sat in the living room, the phone rang suddenly, making him jump. He answered, and Enzo's whisper came through the line. "We need to meet," Enzo said. Henry felt a wave of relief, mixed with worry over the urgency in Enzo's voice. "Where and when?" Henry asked. "Tomorrow at the cafe like before." "Come alone," Enzo replied. The next morning, Henry arrived at the cafe, his nerves on edge. He spotted Enzo sitting with his head bowed, and Henry approached, feeling the gravity of the moment. "Enzo," Henry said, sitting down across from him, "did you find anything?" Enzo looked up, clearly anxious but resolute. "Yes, I managed to get into Marco's office. It wasn't easy, but I retrieved some recordings and documents he uses to control Emily," Enzo said, sliding a small stack of papers across the table. Henry picked them up, feeling the weight of their importance. "Are these recordings strong enough to incriminate him?" Henry asked. "Yes," Enzo confirmed. They include direct threats, insults, and confessions. But if he finds out I took these, I'm finished. Henry placed a reassuring hand on Enzo's shoulder, understanding the courage it took to do what he had done. You did the right thing, Enzo. We can fight him now, Henry assured. We'll use this evidence the right way, Henry said, trying to comfort Enzo. I hope so, Enzo whispered, visibly trembling. Just make sure my name stays out of it. Marco doesn't forgive. Henry nodded, well aware of Enzo's fear. He knew that Marco wouldn't let go easily, but for the first time he felt a spark of hope. Clutching the documents tightly, he knew they had the key to fighting back, and they needed to act fast. I'll get this to our lawyer immediately, Henry said, rising from his seat. We'll do everything we can to keep you safe. Thank you, Enzo. Enzo nodded silently, and Henry left the cafe, gripping the documents, feeling as though Emily and her children's fate was about to change. But he also knew that Marco would not go down without a fight. The final showdown was coming. When Henry returned home, he explained to Emily what he had obtained. Seeing the stack of documents, Emily's eyes filled with tears of relief and fear. I don't even know what to say, Emily whispered, her voice trembling as she held the documents. Could this really save us? These recordings will reveal Marco's true nature, Henry replied with confidence. We'll take this evidence to our lawyer, and he'll use it in court to make sure Marco can't hurt you or the kids anymore. Emily took a deep breath, clutching the documents to her chest. I can't express what this means to me, Henry. For the first time, I feel like there's a real chance we can escape him. Henry placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. It's not over yet. Marco will still try to fight, but we're stronger now. We'll push this through court, and he won't be able to control you any longer. Emily nodded, trying to hold back tears. She knew the road ahead was still fraught with challenges, but for the first time in years, she could see a glimmer of hope. The next day, Henry and Emily met with their lawyer, who was astonished by the amount of evidence they had gathered. The lawyer immediately began formulating a strategy to use the recordings in court. With this compelling evidence, Emily finally had a fighting chance to confront Marco on equal footing. Yet Marco wouldn't be defeated easily. Henry knew that Marco would retaliate, and time was not on their side. As the lawyer prepared their case, Emily remained on high alert, constantly fearing Marco's next move. Henry, however, grew more resolute. He knew that protecting Emily and the children wasn't just about winning in court. It was about reclaiming the dignity and freedom that Marco had stolen from them. Henry was ready to fight to the end to give them a real chance at a new life. The tension mounted with each passing day. Henry knew that Marco would soon realize the recordings were missing, and the confrontation would be inevitable. Emily tried her best to keep calm, not wanting to frighten her children, but Henry could see the fear etched in her eyes. The lawyer worked tirelessly to prepare their case, but time seemed to crawl by, as if mocking them. Then, everything shifted. One morning, as Emily was making breakfast, the phone rang. Henry, sitting at the table, felt his stomach clench with dread. A sense of foreboding washed over him as he picked up the phone. The voice on the other end confirmed his worst fears. Henry, it's me, the lawyer. Marco has filed an emergency custody petition. He's claiming Emily is mentally unstable and is putting the children in danger. The court hearing is set for next week. Henry took a deep breath, trying to suppress his anger. Marco had made his move, and now the battle would officially unfold in the courtroom. Money and influence can make a big difference, Henry said, clutching the phone tightly. Are we prepared? He asked the lawyer, worry evident in his voice. We have the recordings and documents as our main evidence, but Marco has some of the best lawyers on his side. This will be a tough fight. Prepare for the worst, the lawyer replied gravely. Henry thanked him and hung up. When he turned around, Emily was standing by the table, her face pale with worry. What's happened? She asked, trying to remain calm. Marco is trying to get full custody of the kids. We only have a week until the hearing, Henry said bluntly. Emily raised a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with fear. He'll take my children away. I know he will. He has money, power, and I have nothing, she whispered, her voice shaking. Henry stood up, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. Emily, we won't let that happen. We have the evidence, we have the truth on our side, and now we have to be strong. For you and the kids. Marco isn't going to win this time. Emily nodded, struggling to process what she had just heard. She knew Marco would do anything to regain control, and the thought of losing her children almost paralyzed her with fear. But looking at Henry, she felt a sliver of hope. He had done so much for her and the kids. Maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. In the following days, Henry's home remained a tense place. Emily lived in a constant state of anxiety, waiting for Marco's next move. And he didn't disappoint. On Thursday morning, just 2 days before the hearing, Henry was in the garden when a black car pulled up in front of the house. Marco stepped out, a smug smile on his face. Henry slowly stepped to the door, his mind braced for the confrontation. Marco surveyed the property as if he were standing on familiar ground. Henry, Marco greeted, his tone almost friendly. Good to see you. I'm here to take back what's mine. Anger bubbled up inside Henry. He knew Marco had come to intimidate them, to remind Emily and the children that he still held power. Francesca and the kids aren't your possessions, Marco, Henry replied evenly. They're safe here, and you're not taking them anywhere. Marco took a step closer, the smile disappearing from his face. I'm not here to play games, he said coldly. I know what you and that traitor Enzo did. I know you stole the recordings, but it won't matter. Next week in court, I'll make sure she never sees her kids again. And you made a big mistake getting involved. Henry held his ground, his gaze unwavering. You don't control things anymore, Marco. The evidence we have will show everyone who you truly are. Emily isn't alone this time. Marco sneered, a smug expression creeping onto his face. I'm always in control, Henry. And in court, where money talks, you'll understand what I mean. He leaned in closer, his voice dripping with menace. Don't underestimate me. Before Henry could respond, Emily appeared at the door. She instinctively stepped back when she saw Marco, her eyes wide with fear. Marco's lips curled into a smirk. Ah, Emily. Hiding here with this old man, are you? You know this won't last. Emily froze for a moment, but then something shifted inside her. Henry saw a spark of determination in her eyes, a fire he hadn't seen before. No, Marco, you've already lost, she said firmly. You don't control me anymore, and you'll see that in court. Marco was momentarily taken aback but quickly masked his surprise. His face hardened. We'll see, he muttered, turning back toward his car. See you Monday. Enjoy your time with the kids while you still can. Henry and Emily stood together in silence as Marco drove away, his threat still hanging in the air. But now something had changed. Emily was no longer the frightened woman she once was. She was ready to fight. You're so strong, Emily, Henry said, an encouraging smile on his face. Emily took a deep breath, trying to steady her emotions. I won't let him scare me anymore. I won't let Marco take my kids away. I'm ready to fight. When the court hearing began, Marco's accusations were clear and fierce. He claimed that Emily was mentally unstable and unfit to care for their children. His lawyer painted an exaggerated picture, attempting to depict her as an irresponsible mother. Henry sat beside Emily, fury simmering inside him as he listened to the lies, but he knew he had to remain composed. When it was Emily's turn to defend herself, her lawyer presented the recordings and documents Enzo had bravely secured. The evidence was damning. The audio tapes exposed Marco's threats, manipulations, and even confessions of intentionally making Emily's life miserable. As the recordings played, Henry couldn't help but notice Marco's expression change as the control he prided himself on started to slip away. This evidence reveals the true nature of Marco, Emily's lawyer declared, looking firmly at the judge. It shows he is unfit to have custody of these children. Emily has endured years of psychological abuse and only wants to protect her kids from a life of fear and control. The judge, visibly impacted by the evidence, turned a stern gaze on Marco. "Mr. Marco," the judge said gravely, "these recordings speak for themselves. Your behavior not only inflicted emotional harm on your ex-wife but also demonstrates a blatant disregard for the well-being of your children. I have serious doubts about your suitability as a guardian." Marco clenched his fists, his face taut as his lawyer attempted to counter the damning evidence. But the undeniable truth left little room for defense. Despite his wealth and influence, Marco was now exposed. The hearing stretched on for hours, each detail scrutinized. Henry sat beside Emily, whispering words of encouragement when she seemed on the verge of breaking down. Her strength surprised everyone, even herself. For the first time, Emily felt that she was not fighting alone. Finally, the judge announced a recess to deliberate. The courtroom grew tense as everyone waited. Emily's hands trembled, but Henry held them firmly. "It'll be okay," he said softly, his eyes gentle. "We've done everything we could. Now we just have to have faith." Emily nodded, trying to steady her nerves. Henry was right, but the fear of losing her children still loomed. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, and waited. When the judge returned, the entire room fell silent. After reviewing all the evidence and testimony, the judge began. "It is clear that Mr. Marco is unfit to care for the children. Emily has demonstrated, even under the most difficult circumstances, her capability and willingness to protect them. Therefore, I award full custody to Emily and issue a restraining order against Mr. Marco, prohibiting him from interfering in the lives of his ex-wife and children." Emily covered her mouth with her hands as tears streamed down her face. Henry felt a massive weight lift off his chest. Marco leapt to his feet, shouting, "This isn't over. I'll appeal. This is only the beginning." The judge glared at him with disdain. "Mr. Marco, I suggest you watch your words. If you continue this behavior, I'll have grounds for a deeper investigation." Marco's fists tightened, but he knew he had lost. Henry and Emily stood, ignoring Marco's threats as they left the courtroom. Outside, Emily stopped, breathing in the fresh air, feeling freedom for the first time in years. She turned to Henry, her eyes filled with tears of gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you. You saved us," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Henry smiled warmly. "I didn't do it alone, Emily. You're stronger than anyone I know. Now you're free." Emily embraced Henry, and for the first time in years, she felt she could live without fear. In the days following the trial, life at Henry's house began to find a new sense of peace. The court's decision brought Emily a sense of safety she hadn't felt in a long time. Marco, though furious, was forced to back down, and Emily could finally start rebuilding her life for her and her children. Matteo and Luca played in the garden, their laughter filling the air, blending with the flowers that Emily and Henry had planted together. Watching them, Emily felt a deep, unshakable peace. Henry stepped out with 2 cups of coffee, handing one to her as he sat down beside her. "The kids look so happy," he remarked. "They do," Emily agreed, smiling as she watched her sons. "I never thought I'd ever feel this free again." Henry took a sip of his coffee, reflecting on everything they had gone through together. From the moment he met Emily in that supermarket, desperate and struggling with her 2 children, to this moment so much had changed. He had changed too. The loneliness he felt after losing Anna had been replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. "You've been so brave, Emily," Henry said, his voice full of sincerity. "No matter what Marco did, you stayed strong and protected your kids." Emily looked at Henry, her heart overflowing with gratitude. He had not only helped her and her children escape danger, but he had given them a new family and a place to belong. If you enjoyed this story about how love and kindness can flourish even in the most challenging circumstances, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story, which will pop up on your screen soon. I'm sure you'll love it.